My name's Gail Hurley. I'm a senior advisor with the Global Ethical Finance Initiative based here in Edinburgh, and it's my pleasure to kick off today's session. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today for our event Path to COP26, 1 year to go, organised by the Global Ethical Finance Initiative as part of their Path to COP26 campaign. And special thanks in particular to our distinguished panelists and moderator. We're really looking forward to hearing from you all in a few moments. Before I hand over to them, first a few words on the Path to COP26 campaign organised by GEFI. The campaign is working with the financial sector and businesses ahead of the UN's climate change conference to accelerate practical efforts to tackle climate change and ensure that finance plays a leading role in the global response to the climate emergency. It's also providing a platform for the financial sector to connect, share knowledge and mobilise ahead of COP26. Over 45 institutions and organisations have so far signed up to GEFI's Path to COP26 campaign, and representing over 2.7 trillion in assets, including major market leaders around the world. So thank you very much to all those that have signed up so far. Others are very much invited to join this effort. So please do take a look at our website, path2cop26.com, or the GEFI website. And you'll also find more information there about GEFI's programme of events and activities being scheduled ahead of the COP26 event, as well as at the climate change conference itself on topics such as greening your pension, finance for nature, faith in finance, and a whole range of other issues. In fact, don't hesitate to send us your suggestions for topics and themes that you would like to see us cover. And we hope that you will join us in making that schedule of events a big success, and that collectively we can build momentum ahead of the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, which is now just 1 year away. The countdown has started, and being based in Scotland, this is a really exciting time for us all at GEFI, and it's well placed to coordinate the leading players in the finance industry. We have an excellent set of speakers today from the banking community, from the asset management sector, also our distinguished moderator, Dr. Hamish Patrick of Shepherd and Wedderburn. Thanks to you all. Before I hand over to you, Hamish, just a few words by way of setting the scene. I wanted to remind us all that next year's climate change conference will be the most important COP since the Paris Accord was agreed in 2015, which committed the world to limit global temperature rises to below 1.5 degrees C. And at COP26 a year from now, we can expect major international announcements on decarbonisation, on global climate finance, and of course, following last week's election results in the United States, there will be intense interest, of course, in the way in which the United States will re-engage on the climate change agenda. So it's a high stakes event, and the finance sector is a high stakes sector as well. Finance is a high stakes issue. And prior to my work in GEFI as an advisor and my broader freelance advisory work, I actually spent 10 years working at the UN. And over the last 5 years, I've definitely seen a noticeable uptick in the number of new initiatives and networks emerge related to ethical finance, related to responsibility and sustainability in financing, and to try to ensure that the finance industry can be part of the solution to climate change and to sustainable development more broadly. We've seen new financial instruments emerge and really take off, such as green bonds, for example. New funds emerge, much stronger focus on disclosure and reporting. And there's no doubt that now there's an increasingly large and committed set of investors, asset managers, banks and companies out there committed to doing much better in finance. And that's all really, really positive. But at the same time, I also wanted to remind ourselves that more needs to be done. The UN recently issued quite a damning report on the failure of the financial sector to properly understand and monitor the environmental damage that some of its activities might cause. They showed that too much finance is still not finding its way to where it's needed most, and not enough is being invested in green technologies, and too much finance is still finding its way to supporting environmentally damaging investments. And coming from an international development perspective or background myself, it's also important to point out that not enough finance is finding its way to the world's poorest countries and communities where the sustainable development finance gaps and the needs are the highest, the investment needs are the highest. And the current COVID-19 crisis has only reinforced the critical role that finance needs to play in supporting not only a green but an inclusive recovery worldwide. So I think COP26 will be an important opportunity for the finance industry to demonstrate that it can be part of the solution to climate change, to sustainable development, to ensure that there's a sustained flow of finance to the places, the sectors, and the people that need it most. And let us remember also that the finance sector has a very powerful voice. It's very influential globally, and it clearly can help us to drive forward the changes that we need to see globally on the climate emergency. So with those few thoughts about what's at stake at COP26, it's my pleasure to hand over to our moderator for today's session, Dr. Hamish Patrick, who's head of the financial sector at Shepherd and Wedderburn. He is very well placed to lead this afternoon's discussion. Thank you, Hamish. He's played a leading role throughout his career in the development of market standards, innovations in securitization, and in many other areas. Shepherd and Wedderburn are part of GEFI's Path to COP26 campaign. So thank you very much for joining that effort. And it's my pleasure to hand over to you, Hamish. Thanks very much. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Gail. I'm very pleased to have been asked to moderate today's discussion, just as Shepherd and Wedderburn is very pleased to be more broadly involved in GEFI's Road to COP26. All of which very much reflects the work we've been doing ourselves over a number of years with clients all across our practice and now towards the green recovery, and indeed reflecting our focus, like so many others, on sustainability in our own business. Today's event is, of course, very much about looking forward to COP26 in Glasgow in a year's time and the ways in which practical actions in the financial sector can help make COP26 a major step forward, building on the Paris Accord. We're therefore very lucky to have three such eminent speakers today in the shape of David Pitt-Watson, Isabel Fernandez, and Ingrid Holmes. And importantly, in my view, we'll be covering both equity and debt finance. David Pitt-Watson is a leading thinker and practitioner in responsible investment. He was co-founder and CEO of Hermes Responsible Investment Activities and later played a key role as chair of the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative in the run-up to the Paris Climate Conference. He holds a number of non-executive and advisory roles in the field and is a visiting fellow at Cambridge Judge Business School. Isabel Fernandez is head of wholesale banking at ING and also has been a member of ING's Banking Management Board for a number of years, prior to which she was Global Commercial Leader and Head of Sales at General Electric, based in the USA. She is therefore very well placed to focus on what is needed to implement practical change in this context. Ingrid Holmes is Director of Policy at Federated Hermes and has many years' experience working on environmental policy and sustainable finance. In addition to her private sector roles and prior work in science publishing and journalism, she has also held advisory roles for the UK government and the EU, and as a member of the UK Green Finance Initiative and the European Commission's high-level expert group on sustainable finance. Before we hear from our speakers, I should mention that we very much want to hear your questions and comments too, which we can pick up in our Q&A discussion section later on. So please do use the Zoom question function and we'll pick your questions up. And please also use the chat function as we go along to contribute to the debate and use the hashtag #COP26 for broader discussion on social media. Enough of me, however, and I'll now pass on to David Pitt-Watson.
Hamish, thank you very much. Yeah, look, I chaired the UN Environment Programme Finance Initiative in the run-up to the Paris talks. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what happens at one of these a big COP meetings, because I thought that might be interesting for the audience. And then to talk a little bit about the relationship between finance and the negotiations. But I'd start my comments by saying we all have to recognize that climate really matters for finance. This isn't something that we can leave to other people, because it's the very purpose of finance to be taking people's money from point A where it is to point B where it's needed. And we know, if we've even ever opened up a newspaper, that point B where it's needed is really very large amounts of investment in the new technologies and the new energy sources that we need to address climate. And we also know that not nearly enough of that green finance is taking place right now, and far too much brown finance is still taking place. But of course, the resolution of this problem is not one that the finance industry can solve simply on its own. This is something that we need help from everybody in doing, and particularly we need help from the policymakers. And that's why the COP is so important to the finance industry, because we need them to be a success and they need us to be a success if we're to get money to flow. So look, let me talk a little bit about what a COP's like, and then I'll talk about how it is that we can help the COP, and then how it is the COP might be able to help us in finance. So if you've never been to one of these things before, I hadn't really before I got involved in the UN. These are the most extraordinary processes. I remember in Paris, there was the negotiation room, and I mean, it would have had 1,000 more people in it, big screens. There were all sorts of fringe meetings that would be going on. There were stalls and displays from all sorts of different countries and different companies, big fringe, like a massive trade show, absolutely massive. And prior to the Paris conference as well, they had all sorts of other conferences that had similar characteristics, not so much fringe maybe, but similar characteristics. They were known as the Ascent meetings. I don't know how they're doing them with the with the COVID, but of course, when people go to Paris, most of the discussion has to go to Glasgow. Most of the discussion needs to have taken place before that. Otherwise, you can't suddenly have people arriving and say, I'm going to commit China or America or Britain or France to something that hasn't already been discussed. So this massive big event, 190 something nations are going to be represented there. Some of them extremely sophisticated places, the United States, for example. Some of them very small countries, not very wealthy countries either. And of course, they won't necessarily know a lot about how it is that our finance industry works. What they will, though, discuss, and if Paris is anything to go by, the absolute sort of ground base to all of this discussion about climate is about who's responsible and who pays. You may know there's a group we hear about in the news called the G7. There's another group at the United Nations, it's called the G77. And the G7 is the rich countries, the G77 is the other countries who feel underrepresented. And they're the ones, I think, who will come to the Glasgow conference saying, look, we know that the world has run out of carbon budget, and we're going to destroy it if we put much more carbon into the atmosphere. But it's the wealthy countries of the North that became wealthy by doing that need to pay for making sure that we too can develop as they've developed without causing similar damage. And the people that are coming there, many of the negotiators, as I say, will know very, very little about how our finance industry works. And they will be quite suspicious of how our finance industry works. That doesn't make them different from many people in our own country. In the UK, for example, the Bank of England a few years back did a survey asking people to find one word to describe the finance industry. And the word they chose was corrupt, which is not a great word. But if you imagine people who are coming from Senegal or Fiji or wherever, arriving in Glasgow, and we're the finance industry trying to lecture to them, that doesn't sound like a clever way of doing things. They're unlikely to feel sympathetic to that. So we need to think about, how do we help them get a really strong deal? Because we need them to get a strong deal for the finance industry to do its job more easily. And look, Gail, you mentioned there are just hundreds of things that are going on, thousands of flowers blossoming. I mean, the principles for responsible banking, for sustainable insurance, the principles for responsible investment. Investment is my world. You could add to that the IIGCC, Institutional Investor Group on Climate Change, the Asset Owners Net Zero Alliance series in the United States, groups in Australia, in Asia Pacific, and on and on and on. And that's absolutely great. But somehow we need to bring that voice together to be able to say that, look, where we stand and where we legitimately stand, I think, in talking about the economic prospects for the world, is to say, look, the really costly thing at Glasgow would be not to do a tough deal. That's the worst thing that could possibly happen, because at some stage we need to stop climate change, or else it is an existential catastrophe. The quicker we get a tough deal where everybody agrees, the better. And I remember one of the things we did at Paris was we organized, there've been a few since then, the first mega petition of investors. So we had $24 trillion of investors asking the delegates to do a much stronger deal than they actually did. We really featured green bonds, which was just taking off and needed a bit more energy, just to demonstrate the scale, but also just to be able to talk to people about how they represented a way in which the finance industry of the North could finance projects in the South. I remember doing seminars with some people from Morocco who were building a huge, I think it's built now, solar power plant, which had been financed with a green bond. And then we had somebody from a pension fund in the United States saying how they'd invested in that green bond. So pensioners in the North were funding solar power plants in Morocco. But I think one must expect a degree of cynicism from the delegates as regards the finance industry, because they're going to say, look, at Copenhagen, it was agreed that £100 billion a year was going to be coming from the North to the South to help us do this. Can you show us the £100 billion? And the fact of the matter is, I think that will be quite difficult to show. But it's very important that we're encouraging people to do a good deal. But there's another thing that we can do, which is helpful as well, but it's helpful to us. It's using COP to help us get our industry to do better. And that, I think, is what the COP can do for finance. And you'll see there's a conference going on just now. It's got lots and lots of sort of high hegions in the finance industry, Mark Carney and folk from the government and so on. They'll be pushing, for example, on more reporting, the TCFD, this idea of the Sustainable Standards Board. That's all great stuff. Hugely support it, have done for many, many years. But look, it's far from enough in terms of what it is that we need to be able to deliver from the finance industry. I mean, on reporting alone, we've got from now on, with these new reports that we have from the Accounting Standards Board, that climate must be in the calculation of profit. We need to be absolutely enforcing that everywhere in the world, that you cannot draw up or audit a set of accounts where you've ignored the climate challenge. So lots of stuff on reporting, I think we'll see, and that would be good, and the COP can help us with that. I'd like us to use the COP also to start to think about stewardship, especially Hamish, in equities. You were talking about equities and bonds, because equities, of course, are permanent capital. Divesting from equities is fine, but the real power equity gives you is a vote. So how about we have a vote that says, yeah, we have a vote every year in this country for directors. Are we really continuing to appoint people to run companies, big public companies, who won't commit to running their company consistent with the Paris Accord? I think we might ask ourselves that and see, isn't that something we could get together and do? Aren't there other things that we could be doing there? And then finally, and perhaps primarily, we do need to think about that intermediation, getting the money from point A where it is to point B where it's needed. That, by the way, is what the delegates will want us to prove that we are doing. And we need to explain that it is being done, that more is being done, and how that more is going to be done. And by the ways, we will and we can do that institution by institution. We can do that industry by industry. I'd like to see us do it country by country. I'm Scottish myself. I hope that Scotland, Edinburgh in particular, has got something that it's going to offer. We should have things that the UK is offering and that Europe is offering as well. But let me just finish with a caution. There is lots of good stuff that is going on in finance. And there's lots of good stuff that's going on in public policy. But the Paris Accord was not one that got an agreement that was going to keep us to well below 2 degrees, except through voluntary targets, which are not strong enough and in any case are not being lived up to. So the onus must come back on us. We must be able to show that we genuinely are doing the right thing in the finance industry. And I think there is a distance between what it is that's happening now and what it is that needs to happen. I think the people that will come as delegates to the COP will not be interested in virtue signaling from the finance industry, but they will be interested in genuine demonstration and education that our industry is using its powers to clean up the economic activity around the globe and to intermediate the money that is needed for a green economy in the future. And my final comment, going back to Paris, I remember I was quite tired by the end of when we got to Paris. And I remember one of the delegates that I'd met maybe a couple of years before at one of these Ascent meetings. And he took me aside and said, David, when I first met you, I really thought you were the enemy. I thought you came from the finance industry, and the last people we needed in getting a deal on climate were people that came from the finance industry. And I've realized that you are actually on our side. And that's right. I think finance must be, because if it's to do its job, it must be on the COP delegate side. But it's not what we say, it's what it is that we can demonstrate that we're actually doing. And I hope over the next 12 months, we will see the radical change that will demonstrate that finance is indeed on the side of the people who are trying to negotiate a sustainable future for the planet. So that'd be my opening comments, Hamish.
Thanks a lot, David. There's certainly a lot for us to pick up on later. Perhaps we'll now move on to hear the banking perspective from Isabel Fernandez of ING. Over to you, Isabel.
Yeah, thank you, Hamish. And it's a real pleasure to be here and part of this panel today and share with you some of the insights and experiences we have here at ING. And thanks, Gail and David, for your introductions and your thoughts. So where do we stand today? Now, there doesn't a day go by before we hear something about the challenging times we're collectively going through, right? These are quite unprecedented times because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the challenges that we faced before this crisis haven't really disappeared. And those are challenges around climate change, loss of biodiversity, human rights violations, poor labor conditions, and financial distress. And we see the pandemic as a collective opportunity to kind of hit the reset button, as an opportunity to make change and to make new choices, to build back an even better world. Now, we want to play our part by financing a social and green recovery that creates jobs, speeds up growth, and builds more resilient societies. So what does it mean for us and what we were calling climate action? Now, it was said earlier, commitment is important, but action really is what counts. Now, we've taken the lead in pioneering and also inviting other banks to join us for the ride. Back in late 2018, I personally announced that at the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco. We started the process of steering our entire lending portfolio, which is more than 600 billion euro, in line with Paris. And we had struggled for a number of years to figure out how to do that. And we're doing this now in what we call an innovative approach we call Terra. And at the heart of Terra is the climate methodology co-developed with the 2DI investing initiative and the use of mostly the PACTA methodology. And it uses science-based climate scenarios to measure the impact of different sectors on the climate and to set targets for each individual sector to transition to a low carbon future. Now, it works by looking effectively sector by sector at the technology shift that is needed to keep the rise of global temperatures well below the dangerous levels. And it measures the gap between that technology necessary and versus what the clients are currently using themselves today. Now, we first focused on our sectors in our loan book that generated the most greenhouse gases. Sectors like energy, automotive, shipping, aviation, steel, cement, and real estate. And Terra tells us per each individual sector how far along we are on the path to Paris and what is still needed to get there. Now, we can then finance the technology and innovation, which is what it's all about, that clients need to move their businesses further along the Paris pathway. Now, we believe that Terra can change the way that the banks think about the energy transition. This climate alignment approach is precise, it's forward-looking, and will ultimately have significant impact as it steers key sectors towards technologies that underpin a low carbon future rather than only measure a carbon-rich past. So with Terra, ING was the first bank in the world to commit to using forward-looking science-based climate scenarios to steer its business strategy. Now, I'm happy to tell you that we have now released our second Terra Progress Update report on our efforts to align our portfolio with Paris. And the report details our progress and our targets on climate alignment in our 9 sectors that are most responsible for climate change. And it shows whether our lending in each of these sectors is adding up to contribute to the goals of Paris. And those 9 sectors are mostly on track for climate alignment, with progress still needed in some. I'll give you a specific example. For instance, take one of the targets included in the report is to reduce the financing to upstream oil and gas by 19% by 2040, measuring from the 2019 levels. Now, that is in line with the International Energy Agency's Sustainable Development Scenario to meet Paris. Now, if the SDS adapts to require more drastic reduction anytime in the years ahead, that revised scenario will still go into our guidance for the direction that ING takes. So it's dynamic and it helps us steer. Now, what this means is that we now know where we are, where we should be heading by setting targets and timelines, but we're also able to steer our portfolio by engaging with our clients to ultimately make choices in financing. Now, many clients recognize the impact of climate change on their businesses and are already looking for sustainable financing solutions to change their course. And we can support our clients with our industry insights and incentivize them financially or otherwise to take necessary steps. For example, by reducing the emission intensity of their activities. Now, our approach to climate alignment is inclusive. So we work with our clients to facilitate and finance their shift to a low carbon technology. And it's also collaborative. We work with other banks and experts to set an open source methodology standard for the sector and thereby increase our impact If you just Google ING and Terra, or you go to ing.com, it's entirely open source. Everything is available to any institution. So in summary, Terra is about financing our clients' transition, right, to a low carbon society with engagement at its heart and the divestments as a last resort. Because it's not about where our clients are today, but mostly where they are heading tomorrow. We have come a long way and have landed on a viable way forward that allows us to take action today. But of course, it's still a work in progress. I mean, we don't want to wait for the perfect methodology because there's really urgency to act. So we decided to move forward and tackle the problems along the way, even if we still don't know exactly how we're going to help solve all this. So the other thing is that Terra is based on collaboration. So we can sit here in our, I guess, home offices and come up with what we think is the right way to measure and steer. But if we do it only by ourselves, what effect will we have on the world around us? So the only way to create real change is to do it together with the financial sector. And that's why we actively worked with other banks in piloting the methodology with 2DI. That's why it is open source and open for all banks to use. And I hope this is just the beginning. Now we have today as ING a leadership position in developing an innovative, accurate way we feel to measure climate impact for banks. And we were the first bank to publish any type of climate alignment disclosure, committing to steer our business towards science-based scenarios. We were a founding member, of course, of the Principles for Responsible Banking, and our work has now laid the groundwork for the collective commitment to climate action. And that's now been signed by 38 banks since the end of 2018 globally. And this is the banking sector's farthest reaching commitment to climate alignment. So only if we work together can we make a real impact. Now, I've got a clear call to action, and I'm happy to share some of my thoughts in the panel discussion, Hamish. So look forward to having that chat. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Isabel. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very glad we're hearing the views of both debt and equity today, and I'll now pass you on to Ingrid Holmes of Federated Hermes to give us a view from the perspective of an asset manager.
Thanks, Hamish, and thanks to the GEFI team for inviting me to join this discussion today. I'm going to spend the next few minutes just talking about some of the issues we're really wrestling with inside the international business of Federated Hermes as we figure out what we do next on climate change ahead of COP26. We've been reporting on our climate action now for many years. We actually, at the end of October, were delighted to receive an award from the French government for Best Asset Manager TCFD report. The judging team particularly liked the transparency of our reporting on how we use various proprietary and non-proprietary tools to look at climate risk, some of which Isabel has actually mentioned. So we too use the 2° investing factor tool and find it very useful. But disclosures are only the beginning really of the journey, as David Pitt-Watson said in his introductory remarks. And what we're wrestling with now is how do we make ourselves more accountable for actions and outcomes on climate change? And for us, that means particularly, what are we going to be doing to commit to net zero goals? When should we be trying to achieve that? And when should we be committing to becoming a Paris-aligned firm, whatever that means? That some of the issues that Isabel wrestled with, we're wrestling with too. So those are our two live discussions at the moment. And I want to just go into some detail on what we are doing to make those a reality and try to put some dates on them. So it wouldn't be a Federated Hermes discussion without touching on engagement. This is something our business is very well known for, as well as strong stewardship within our own assets. We steward on behalf of now over $1 trillion in global assets. Climate change is something that's been high on our agenda for many years. What we've been doing now is running a number of different climate risk assessment tools across all our proprietary portfolios, and have made a commitment where we identify any substantive transition risk. We've made a commitment to engage with 100% of those companies. While transition risk is one of the big sort of red flags for us, of course, we need to be considering physical risk as well. And we have developed and will be publishing a set of climate change expectations on those companies. So this is 6 key things we expect every company to be thinking about. And those include an expectation to disclose in line with the TCFD, to prioritise putting in place sufficient governance and operational capacity to move forward on climate risk management, to not be afraid and embrace the complexity of this issue, so using scenario analysis tools to look at different futures, to look beyond just operations and strategy to what's happening in supply chains, so taking this broader than just the immediate business, using their public policy influence positively, so acting to engage with governments on new market rules, not to block them. And then finally, we do need to see action, so commitment to science-based targets with interim targets along the way. And that's partnered with a dialogue document that anybody within the business can pick up and use to start a conversation with a firm, regardless of its jurisdiction or its sector, and regardless of whether they are far along on their journey on climate change or just beginning. So that's one of our new sort of strengthenings of action at the business. We're complementing that with a renewed focus on when it's appropriate to withdraw access to capital. So this is something both Isabel and David have touched upon. We have quite a sort of light exclusions policy at the business, but we've come to the conclusion that with the rapidly shrinking carbon budget, there are some activities now, excuse me, that really just can't be justified. And that includes things like burning thermal coal. It includes things like oil and tar sands. So these are activity-based exclusions that we will be introducing alongside a new category of controversial sector. So when a firm will be characterized as controversial is where they might be using fossil fuels, for example, but part of a process of transitioning to a cleaner business model. Under those circumstances, our portfolio managers will still be able to potentially invest, but they have to write a clear and public business case for that, and undertake time-limited engagement with the company to ensure that the transition that we believe is possible does actually come to pass. So using potentially the threat of divestment to actually move those engagement discussions along. So that's new and beefed up for us. We're also looking at how we can move more of the assets we manage to an explicit Paris-aligned thematic strategy. Now that is absolutely going to be dependent on our clients, and so client engagement will be key to growing this market of products that just invest in things that are there or nearly there already. We tend to see much more interest in that currently in the wholesale market than the institutional market, but we believe that the client engagement of the sort that Isabel's been talking about in the banking sector will enable us to grow those assets over time. There are absolutely challenges in dealing with any and all of these issues. So one of them I'd say on the sort of engagement side is how do we keep firms honest, particularly as discussion about nature-based solutions and offsetting grows. There is a place for sure for offsetting, but actually we know now that what we need to see is urgent technology substitution where that is possible. And it is really incumbent upon us within the ERC engagement team and our analysts to understand where solutions being proposed by companies we invest in are enduring and long-term, or where they may just be short-term patches that really don't deal with the need to get emissions out of the system now. For ourselves, there are issues around setting targets. So one of the real challenges I think we face is, while we may have a desire to put in place very near-term Paris alignment and net zero targets, we've seen some of our clients come out with net zero targets of 2035, which is absolutely fantastic. If we move too far ahead of the market and our peers, we may find we're excluding vast portions of the investable universe, underperforming and losing those clients. Similarly, we may find if we wanted to retrospectively introduce Paris alignment targets to existing strategies, we'd need to get client permission for that, and not everybody might be at the same point in the journey we are. So lots of very practical considerations to be thinking about there. But similarly, I do believe technology is at a tipping point. We've seen some fantastic new commitments out of the UK just yesterday. With Biden in the White House, things are looking much more positive on the global climate policy stage, and that changes markets. So if we move too late, are we going to find ourselves on the wrong end of that tipping point? These are really, really difficult discussions and very much sort of leaps of faith into the unknown. But that said, I think COP26 brings with it focus and opportunity. And I'm sure we, like many other firms, are now just very actively considering what the next level of accountability and action is. We have found our membership at the Climate Financial Risk Forum, which is an industry forum convened by the Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority, has been really helpful for just creating a safe space for discussion on these issues and, you know, how do we move forward in the face of uncertainty. But I think it's clear we must, you know, this year is going to be this next 12 months is the years that makes or break global commitment and action as we hit new global emission tipping points in 2030, you know, just around the corner. 10 years isn't that long. So hopefully it will focus minds, and hopefully you'll be hearing more from us at Federated Hermes on what those tangible commitments, targets will be. Thank you.